Welcome back. In the previous videos of this chapter, we focused upon the definitions, components of GDP, and the difference between real and nominal GDP. In this video, we're going to explore the last topic of this chapter, and we're going to conclude. Okay. So here the question we raised is, can we use GDP as a measure of standard of living? All right. I would encourage you to pause the video and think about this by yourself. Okay. Again, think about, what is the standard of living to you? What does that mean? Okay. Do you think GDP can measure that? All right. Now let's try to figure this out. The first thing is no matter how you define the standard of living, you could define that very narrowly, just focusing upon the economic aspect of your life, or you can define it very broadly, which covers maybe social justice, other things that goes far beyond the economy, okay, or the economic aspect. But no matter how you define that, the very first question here we have to deal with is GDP is a measure of economic size, right? In other words, how big the economic pie is, okay, for an economy, not necessarily for a typical person or citizen living in that economy, right? So if you believe that GDP could be a measure of standard of living, then we would easily say that United States has the highest one because it's the largest economy so far measured with the GDP. And the second highest standard of living on this planet would be China because that's the second largest economy, right? India is also a pretty should have a pretty high standard of living because it's, again, among the top 5 largest economies, right? Of course, that's not the truth. That's not the truth, right? Based upon your common sense. So here, the first thing is we have to remove the size effect, okay? In other words, when we look at the standard of living for a typical person in an economy, we're not really talking about how big the economic pie is. Instead, we're talking about how big the slice of the pie a typical citizen will receive, right? So here, again, that's why we come up with this variable called the GDP per capita. Okay? Per capita just means per person, per head. Okay? We're going to say this is a measure of standard of living. All right. Now, here, mathematically, the real GDP per capita equals real GDP divided by the population of the economy. Okay. So here, let's make a quick overtime comparison for the United States between 1969 and 2019. About half a century apart, okay, between the 2 years listed here in the table. Now, if you look at the GDP in billions of dollars, again, that's a measure of how big the economic pie is for the U.S. For 1969, it's slightly below $5 trillion. In 2019, it's above $21 trillion, right? So if you just look at, the GDP, you would find that, the size of the U.S. economy actually grow by 5 times, okay? However, that doesn't mean the standard of living for a typical American improved by 5 times, okay? One of the reasons is there's also a growth of American population. Okay, In 1969, that number is a little above 202 million. In 2019, it's 328 million. Okay? In other words, when our economic pie became bigger over these 5 decades, the population also grow. Okay, so when we look at the GDP per capita per person, we find that in 1969 that number is 24,386. In 2019, it's 65,335. In other words, there there is still a robust growth of the real GDP per person, but definitely not 5 times. Okay, here you find that it's about more than 4 times, but less than I'm sorry, more than twice, but less than 3 times here. Okay. All right. The next thing we would like to chat about here is, do we believe that the GDP per capita is a perfect measure of standard of living? Okay. Now, I bet you can guess the answer is no, right? Because in social sciences, if anybody asks you that something is a perfect, of course it's not going to be a perfect measure. Okay. Here we need to think about why. Okay. And I find some economic or non-economic headlines here. Let's check them out, okay, and see, if those will help us realize the limitations of GDP per capita as the measure of standard of living. Now, here the very first one says that soaring markets helped the richest 1% in the United States and $6.5 trillion in wealth last year, according to the Federal Reserve. Okay, and the Fed's data, and this is a economic headline in 2022. Okay, so it says that during the pandemic years, the income inequality in the United States actually became worse. Okay, because the high income people, their jobs are more flexible. They usually could work from home, so they find that their wealth, their financial situation was less affected by the pandemic. However, a lot of the blue-collar jobs, services jobs, requires the in-person, face-to-face engagement or the performance. Okay, so they have been hit pretty hard during the pandemic. So here, the fundamental issue is the income distribution, right? Because GDP per capita, as demonstrated by the the mathematical calculation we did last slide, it's an average variable, right? So it's on average how much American citizen makes, right? But the average cannot really cover many, even economically, many aspects, right? So there could be still a very large variation across the American population. Okay, so again, you can think about the two hypothetical economies have the same income, right? Average income, but in the first economy, everybody makes exactly the same amount. In other words, everybody is making the average income. However, the second economy, most of the people are super poor. Okay, however, they have one Bill Gates, which when we calculate the average income, we get the same number as the first economy. Okay, so of course we would say that the standard of living in the second economy is going to be worse than the first one because it's highly unequal, right? Okay, so this is the first one. The second one here is again another headline earlier this year. It says the Taliban ended the college for women in Afghanistan. Okay, so this one tells us that for a given GDP per capita, there could be a variation in the right for education, right, or gender inequality, all right, that is going to be left out when we just look at the GDP per capita. Okay. Here another headline says that Canada's underground economy surged to $68.5 billion in 2021. So here, what we're talking about is, remember earlier this chapter when we defined GDP, we said that it doesn't cover any underground economy or home production, DIY things, right? So, when we talk about the underground economy, people often think about these illegal things, drugs, right? Prostitution, these things. But, sometimes when we look at the underground economy, they're not necessarily illegal. It, we call them underground economy or sometimes shadow economy simply because the government has no knowledge about how big it is or these economic activities or transactions being taking place. Okay, so here again, as you can see, even as one of the most advanced, wealthiest economy, Canada has a pretty sizable underground economy. Okay, so this again has been left out because it's not covered by GDP. Of course, it's not going to be covered by GDP per capita, but of course these things would affect people's standard of living, right? Now, here is another example in India. So, because of the fast economic development, which can be captured by the GDP per capita, right? A high growth, but at the same time, people suffer from air pollutions. So here, as you can see, a photographer actually, took a picture in the exactly same place. The first one was taken in November this year, November 1st. I'm sorry, the one on your left. The one on your right was taken on November 11th, so just 10 days apart. Then you see a big difference because of the air pollution. Okay, and it's pretty foggy on the right one because of the no temperature, and also the industrial pollution, the burning of agricultural waste, these kind of things, right? But again, it's by just looking at the GDP per capita, you cannot find the difference here. Okay, about the environmental protection, about the air pollution. Another thing here, another interesting one, said that Americans work hundreds of hours more a year than Europeans. Okay, so this one tells us that when we look at the standard of living, important thing is this work-life balance, right? When we reach a high income, but does that mean we work like 724 to reach that level, or we can actually still get a pretty good balance between the work and life? Okay, it looks like the Europeans they can reach a high level of income, but not necessarily sacrifice a lot of the family time and a lot of vacation time. Okay, all right. The very last one talks about the child mortality. Okay, this is from the United Nations. It shows that over 7 million children and youth died in 2021. Again, the access to the quality healthcare treatment is also not directly captured by GDP per capita. Okay. All right.